What if everything we think we know about the Vikings is wrong? What if they were not just marauders of the north, but the survivors of a collapsing world, shaped by disasters so brutal that only the most adaptive humans endured? And what if the real reason Europe feared them wasn't their brutality but their mastery? Their engineering, their community systems, their winter technologies, their spiritual psychology. All born from a landscape trying to kill them every single day. Tonight, we uncover the Viking world as it truly was, not the legend, but the truth. For centuries, textbooks painted the Vikings as nothing more than violent raiders, the storm on the horizon, the axe in the night. But archaeology is now exposing a truth far more unsettling. These men and women were not merely warriors. They were shaped, sharpened, and engineered by one of the most hostile environments on Earth. From the razor-cold Arctic winds of Norway to the volcanic plains of Iceland, their world pushed the human body and spirit to the brink. Winter wasn't a season, it was a predator that hunted without mercy. Crops failed without warning. Wolves circled the edges of torchlit villages. And one wrong step, one bad harvest, one early freeze, could mean death. So the Vikings adapted in ways no other medieval society was forced to. Their weapons, their homes, their rituals, their spiritual beliefs, even the way they trained their children, all emerged from a constant battle against cold, hunger, and darkness. History remembers their raids, but raids were only the surface. The deeper mystery, the one we almost forgot to ask, is this. What kind of world creates people capable of crossing oceans, surviving impossible winters, and striking fear into entire continents? Tonight, the real story begins. A Viking child didn't become a warrior by choice, the land demanded it. In the pale blue frost of early morning, boys and girls trained side by side, their breaths rising like smoke signals into the cold air. Archery wasn't a sport. It was insurance against hunger. Shields weren't symbols of glory. They were barriers between life and the chaos that lurked beyond the tree line. "Keep your elbow high," a father would whisper. "Breathe. Let the arrow fly, like your life depends on it." Because sometimes, it did. Long before they ever touched real steel, young Vikings drilled in tight formations. They learned to hold the line, to trust the wooden shield brushing their shoulder, and to feel the rhythm of movement, the way a farmer feels the rhythm of seasons. Strength wasn't taught, it was absorbed from the world around them. From the storms, from the hunger, from the endless work that shaped their hands and their hearts. By 12, a Viking child had endured more hardship than many European adults. By 15, they were weathered by cold, sharpened by loss, and strengthened by necessity. This wasn't a culture obsessed with war. It was a culture where everyone needed the courage to endure. And that quiet, unshakable strength is what terrified the world. Inside the smoke-thick darkness of a longhouse forge, the heartbeat of the Viking world pulsed against the anvil. To an outsider, it might look simple: heat the metal, strike the metal, shape a weapon. But Viking steel was never simple. It was the product of instinct, memory, and a craft so refined that even modern archaeologists struggle to fully explain it. A mastersmith didn't just forge a blade. He listened to it as if the metal itself carried a voice. "The balance is perfect," he would murmur, running a calloused thumb along an edge still glowing with heat. "It sings." These weapons weren't crude tools of brutality. They were precision instruments. Iron folded again and again. Pattern-welded cores that blended strength with flexibility. Edges that held fast even in the killing cold of northern winters. Even today, when researchers place Viking swords under microscopes, many are left stunned. Some blades contain alloys unheard of in medieval Europe. Others display swirling patterns that require advanced techniques far ahead of their time. Techniques that shouldn't have existed in the 8th or 9th century, yet clearly did. This wasn't savagery. It was engineering, shaped by necessity and perfected by generations. And every weapon carried the same silent vow carved into its steel. "We will survive. Long before Viking ships carved their paths across the oceans, the forests shaped the people who would one day command them. The woods taught them how to track, how to endure, and when necessary, how to kill. In the stillness of early winter, hunters spread out with the same discipline they would one day bring to the battlefield. Surround the target. Press the flank. Cut off every escape. Nothing was rushed. Nothing was random. Every step was part of a silent conversation between predator and prey. When a stag finally collapsed into the snow, the hunt didn't end, it transformed. Rough hands pressed gently into warm fur. Slow breaths drifted upward in the frozen air, and words of gratitude were whispered to the unseen spirit of the forest. To modern ears, it might seem like superstition, but to the Vikings, it was a necessary truth. You cannot take from the land without giving respect in return. The meat would fill the smokehouse through the darkest months. The hide became clothing, armor against the wind. Bones turned to tools, sinew to bowstrings. Nothing wasted, nothing taken without purpose. Europe feared the Vikings for their ferocity. But the deeper truth is far more human. A people who lived so close to death learned to value life more intensely than anyone else. Winter was the true enemy. Not kingdoms, not armies. Winter, when the sun faded and the world turned white, survival became a calculation with no margin for error. Meat was divided by need, not desire. Food was smoked, salted, sealed away with almost ritual precision. No one took more than their share because one act of greed, one moment of carelessness, could doom an entire village. The next group waits for the cold, the elders would say. We must keep order. This wasn't politics. It was arithmetic written in frost and hunger. If food spoiled, the weak died first. But the strong followed soon after. Winter didn't care who deserved to live. And this discipline, this almost mathematical approach to survival shaped the Viking mind. Even their enemies noticed the difference. Vikings raided with precision because they lived with precision. Their society wasn't chaotic or reckless, as legends suggest. It was structured, measured, balanced like the beams of a longhouse roof. A winter economy built from the ground up. Shared labor, shared risk, shared survival. This was the quiet foundation beneath their power. Not the sword, not the longship, but the system that kept an entire people alive when nature tried to erase them. Step inside a Viking longhouse, and you enter the beating heart of the North, a world carved from wood, fire, and human resilience. At first glance, it appears simple. A long, dim hall, a fire crackling down the center. Families gathered shoulder to shoulder. But that simplicity is deceptive. Beneath it lies a brilliance that early archaeologists struggled to understand. The walls were built to flex with violent winter storms. The turf-thick roof acted like a natural insulator, trapping warmth and blocking Arctic winds. The central hearth wasn't just a fire, it was a carefully engineered heat source that warmed the entire hall evenly. Smoke vents were positioned with such precision that they functioned almost like a primitive HVAC system, pulling air through the building in a slow, controlled flow. Inside this controlled chaos of heat and timber, life thrived. Women spun wool into garments tough enough to withstand sub-zero nights. Children chased each other between the benches. Leaders debated alliances, trade routes, and the fate of their people. Steam rose from wooden bowls, mixing with the rich smell of roasted meat and fresh bread. The longhouse wasn't just a shelter. It was a survival machine, a communal engine built to outlast storms, hunger, and time itself. And for centuries, it worked flawlessly. Night falls. The lamps are lit. The first horn of ale is lifted high, catching the firelight like liquid gold. A Viking feast was never just a celebration, it was a ceremony of identity, a reminder of who they were and who they were expected to become. Stories rose into the smoke-thick air, swirling with laughter and the crackling of the hearth. Tales of the dragons of the sea longships gliding across the horizon with silent precision. Of giants crushed beneath the will of gods. Of Odin's fury unleashed in storms that bent the world. Of warriors who fought so fiercely that even the waves seemed to bleed. To an outsider, these stories might sound like oversized myths. But to a Viking, they were something far more practical. Maps, emotional blueprints that taught courage, sacrifice, loyalty, legacy, and the price of cowardice. Someday, the elders would say, their voices deep and steady, the skalds will sing of your bravery too. And as a young warrior leaned forward, listening to the fire pop and hiss, he didn't hear fantasy or exaggeration. He heard a lineage he was expected to honor, a destiny he was expected to meet, an unspoken challenge written between every word. Will you be worthy of the story they tell about you? When Viking sails rose on the horizon, villages didn't fear the steel glinting in the sun. They feared the people behind it. Men shaped by winters so brutal they could freeze a grown man in hours. Women who trained, fought, and survived beside them. Children raised from their earliest years to stand firm, shield to shield, against any threat. Smiths who crafted blades so advanced that modern archaeologists still struggle to explain their metallurgy. Sailors who could navigate through fog, storm, and nights without stars. Not with maps, but with memory, instinct, and a relationship with nature most of Europe had long forgotten. To European kingdoms, this all looked like madness. Unpredictable, unstoppable, inhuman. To the Vikings, it was Tuesday. And so the legend of their savagery spread because legends are born when one world collides with another it doesn't understand. Europe called them brutal because it was easier than admitting the truth. They were simply more resilient, more prepared, more adapted to hardship than anyone else. Brutality wasn't their strength. Resilience was. But here is the part history so often forgets, the part that rarely survives in sagas or in soil. When the battle finally ended, when the feast grew quiet, when the longhouse settled into the slow-breathing rhythm of night, the Vikings were also parents. Good night, little one. Good night, mother. Sleep well. In those small exchanges, the myths dissolved. The steel cooling beside the hearth seemed less like a weapon and more like a reminder of the world they fought to protect. The fire softened from roaring flame to gentle ember, casting warm light across faces lined not by war, but by worry, hope, and love. Archaeology can recover weapons, bones, ships, and graves. It can map where they sailed and how they died. But it can never uncover the quiet lullabies whispered in the dark. The soft laughter shared between parent and child. The tenderness that lived behind the hard armor of survival. And perhaps that is the greatest mystery of all. How a people feared across continents could return home, lay down their axes, and love with such fierce, unshakable devotion. So why does the Viking story still haunt us? Perhaps because, in ways we don't like to admit, their world mirrors our own. A climate in flux. Seasons that no longer follow the rules. Communities trying sometimes desperately to adapt to forces far larger than themselves. The Vikings didn't survive because they were the strongest. Strength alone freezes. Strength alone starves. They survived because they were prepared, because they understood that endurance is a system, not an accident. They built homes that breathed with the storms. Weapons that flexed instead of breaking. Communities that shared risk instead of hoarding it. Beliefs that bound them together when the world outside tried to tear them apart. Their legacy was never conquest. Conquest fades. Empires collapse. But adaptation, the ability to reshape life around changing conditions, that endures. And the question they leave hanging over us is unsettling, even uncomfortable. Are we as prepared for our storms, our climate, our crises, our uncertainty as they were for theirs? Because the Vikings didn't fear the future. They built for it. If the forgotten truths of the past help us understand the world we face today, then this journey is far from over. Join us as we uncover more mysteries humanity was never meant to forget. Like, share, and subscribe to Dark Origins, not just to explore history, but to learn what it still has to teach us.